Alright everyone, we start off today ranking the top 5 potential Democratic contenders for 2024. Do I expect it to be a situation where an incumbent is running? Not necessarily. First and foremost, before I get into my predictions, and I'll try to explain why I've got my list of the top 5 in the specific order they're in, there will be a pinned comment down below if you're watching this video on YouTube with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind, I make 2 or 3 videos a day on YouTube, but there are always 2 videos that I make that are just on those sites and not on YouTube. Usually because the subject matter is verboten or because of video overflow. Now, I think the number 1 contender to be the 2024 candidate for the Dems is Kamala Harris. I'll tell you why. While there's the possibility that because she's such a massive failure, and really I don't think could win, it would be really difficult, I think, because she is an egotist, number 1, to convince her to stand down. And I do believe there's a better than 50-50 chance, by the way, that she's a technical incumbent. I think that there's a better than 50-50 chance over the next couple of years that Biden resigns, has significant health issues that lead to his ousting, or is 25th. I think one of those 3 things is more likely than not to happen. I give it a 70% chance. I'd be surprised if Biden at almost 82 years old was even feasibly capable of running again. Even if he's still there, he may decide not to run. The heir apparent becomes Kamala Harris. It's just sort of a party decorum that tends to happen. The incumbent has the right to run for that term. If the incumbent stands aside, the VP is obviously the number 1 choice. Does she have the qualifications to run? No. She's not well-spoken. She's not very likable. She's a one-trick pony. She was a diversity hire. She was put there to contrast with Joe Biden and to bring id poll voters on board with what otherwise would be a ticket that's run by an old white dude. It would have been problematic. They brought her in for diversity purposes, not for any other skill she has. This is why her current major political role as border czar has been an absolute flop, an absolute disaster. She doesn't know what she's doing. She can't even go to the border because she doesn't like confrontation. Even Joe Biden doesn't have a problem with it. Joe Biden will do his tough man thing. You'll notice she gets very uncomfortable when she's asked anything that isn't straight up softball, and even then sometimes she giggles nervously simply because of the subject matter. Nonetheless, I rank her as the most likely contender for the 2024 slot for the Democrats, simply because there's no feasible way they can try to force her aside, especially because it would look racist and sexist. Well, you just don't want this empowered woman to run. Of course she can win, and then the Democrats would get completely slamma-jammed. Number 2, I think, is Joe Kennedy. Keep in mind, this is a person who lost his position to, I can't remember what's his name, the leftoid there. But he can always run potentially on the I told you so platform. If the left implodes, and this relies upon mainly the midterms, if the party autopsy of what's likely to be a wash for the Democrats in the midterms, if that determines reasonably, and of course this would be true, but we'll see how the media spins it, that it was the result of the leftoids in the party preventing negotiation, making life living hell for even for Pelosi and other people who are still fairly far left, what would happen is that the neolibs like Joe Kennedy can come roaring back and say, well, look, we need to solve this issue within our party. He can do the I'm a Kennedy togetherness sort of, hey, we'll go back to the 60s thing. There are a lot of white voters, by the way, who would be, I think, on board with that. A party of Kennedy sort of thing could work, and he'd be in the right age range. He's still quite young, he's reasonably well-spoken, and he looks good for the cameras. It's good optics if the Democrats choose to run a Kennedy. Now, the complication here is, will the mafia allow him to run, or would they kill him, RFK style? Not entirely certain. The powers that be might not want another Kennedy in that office for their own personal reasons. But I think that he basically ticks the boxes. He's got some experience in politics, although not a huge amount, but as we saw with Trump and even Obama, that's not necessarily a modern requirement for the presidency or for any political office. You got to start somewhere. Some people just start at the presidency, basically. But he's well-spoken and young. And also, he can come out of center field and smash the left potentially if things fall apart. I think they will. I don't think that there's any real debate that things aren't going well right now. Biden can constantly rant about how great things are and jobs and stuff. The reality on the ground is totally different from that. The problem is that D.C. has become disconnected from Main Street. Joe Kennedy, as an outsider now in politics anyway, can come in and say, well, I feel your pain, and do that sort of shtick. Would it be authentic? Not entirely. He's a politician in the vein of any other Kennedy that ever existed. But he can make it look good. Something that certainly certain others, like Kamala, can't do. Number 3 is Joe Manchin. Now, do I think that he has do I think he wants to run? No. I think he enjoys his role as basically kingmaker in the Senate. That being said, turning West Virginia into a de facto swing state would definitely be an advantage for a Democratic nominee. It's possible. I don't think that he wants to. I think he likes his Senate role. But I'd say that, it's possible. If he chose to run, he'd be viable. Reasonably well-spoken. It would get some of the Democratic partisans maybe up in arms. But again, like with Joe Kennedy, if in the midterms the Democrats suffer, the neoliberals like Manchin will make the argument, we suffered because the far left wouldn't let us negotiate. You expected us to simply run roughshod over all forms of decorum and control on government, and that's just not something that you need to do. It would destroy the republic. If you can make that pitch to the average voter, that would bring the independents aboard. Certainly, with Joe Manchin, when I look at all of his views, I like his views on guns, which are much more temperate than the average Democrat. I certainly appreciate that he hasn't thrown the filibuster under the bus, although it's possible he will. It might come down to Kyrsten Sinema saving the filibuster, which would be the most hilarious thing in U.S. history, modern U.S. history. That being said, would I vote for him? Probably not. While I appreciate some of the things that he's doing, there are a lot of views that he has that I would not be on board with. And that includes some of his religious views. He's a religious man. Not like Biden religious, like, hey, I go to church occasionally, maybe I'll be denied communion tomorrow, but actually religious. I don't personally care about that sort of thing, because of course I'm not a religious voter. Number 4 is Joe Biden. Now this is getting into long shot territory technically. I think that there's a great chance he won't even be there come the next election. He'll either have died of an aneurysm, he's had multiple falls over the last year, he's had brain aneurysms in the past, and he's suffering from dementia. So that's number 1. Number 2, he may be forced to resign or forced out by the 25th, in part due to that dementia. Also, I think he was kind of reluctant to begin with. He dragged his heels for months and months on even telling people whether he planned on running. I think that they had to bribe the dude. Probably, in part, they probably threatened him and said, well, Hunter Biden's going to end up going to Fed for the rest of his life unless you run. So he pull the family man sort of shtick on him. I think it's unlikely that Biden will be the nominee. But, he is on the list. He's the current incumbent. If he makes it there, and if he chooses to run, and if the Democrats don't say, okay, 82 is too old, we're primarying you, then he would be the nominee. Nobody would run against him. Although here's another interesting thing before I get to number 5, which is Amy Klobuchar, and again I'll explain why. Let's say that you get to the election, Joe says, I'm running, and here's this 81-year-old man with clear cognitive difficulty who probably has not accomplished much of anything good for the country. He is probably reigning over a mediocre economy. He may have started a war. Do you think that it's possible the Democrats then are faced with the ignominious decision of either looking like they're nuts by letting him run and do so virtually unopposed, or that they look like there's a massive schism, like it's going to implode their entire party by saying, no, we don't even recognize the legitimacy of our own incumbent. We're primarying him from the left or something. They don't have a win. In 2024, I'll tell you this, if Biden happens to try to run, the Democrats have lost. They will lose. They'll be punished so severely by voters, it'll be hilarious. If people, by the way, at the local and state level do as I've been suggesting they do and start taking over those political apparatuses to fortify the election against any problems. You got to take over the states, you got to take over the cities, sheriff's offices, city councils and stuff. Start doing it now, don't wait. Make sure that you know when the election's happening and get people out to vote. Do it in person and online. And then number 5 is Klobuchar. And the reason why Klobuchar I put on the list, she's not qualified. She's not well-spoken. She's sort of like Kamala Harris is reckoned to be an unlikable character in her personal life. She looks like the evil mom from Coraline to me, or like a demented version of Martha Stewart, and comes off about the same way. But she happens to be there. She's in the right age range. She has reasonable experience. She ran last time and had at least a pulse for a while. And she's sort of in that group of people where she does the id poll grandstanding from the kind of left, but her policies tell a different story. So she's part of that core of grifters within the Democratic Party that tend to do well, sort of like a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden. I can see her at least mounting a run if there's no incumbency. All of the others rely upon Joe not running. If he does, you might see like Joe Kennedy says, okay, well, I'm half his age. Clearly he wins in the debates because Joe Biden by that point, is he going to be capable of delivering a coherent sentence? No. You might see someone like Klobuchar try to pick away at him. You might see a total outsider from the left attack. It won't be Bernie. Bernie's done, thankfully. Finally, he's going to be gone. Hopefully, he keels over soon, too. But you could see someone from, like, the Geek Squad do it. You could see, like, Rashida Tlaib 2024. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. I'm just looking at the situation for what it is, and I'm thinking to myself, which is worse, having a non-incumbent and shoving your own president aside, president in name, of course, or having a person with clear-cut dementia in their 80s running against a Republican that might be half their age? It might not be Trump. It might be DeSantis running. It could be Rand Paul, relatively young by Senate standards. It could be Ted Cruz. Again, the speech differential alone between any of those individuals and Joe Biden, the Republicans are going to be circling like sharks if Trump doesn't run. And hopefully, right after the midterms, he makes his decision clear whether he's running or not. If he runs, he's the nominee, probably beats Biden, by the way, simply because Biden will not be able to compete. Assuming that Biden's the one running, to be clear. If he doesn't, you're going to see like a really packed field. There's going to be dozens of Republicans because they all know that the odds are with them. They likely win against Joe Biden because Biden will be a failure. In the optic sense, he might be an absentee campaigner if he runs. He might have to concoct some reason why he still wants to do social distancing, man, because it's for think of the children or something, just because he's not going to get more than 2 people to show up. I'd show up at a Biden rally just to see him make gaffes. At some point, it's just Schadenfreude. At some point, it's just you're taking humor in the fact that you're watching this old decrepit vegetable fall apart live on stage, mumbling through notes and not even following them half the time. So that's my top 5 Democratic presidential contenders. I am honestly hoping that Biden runs. I am hoping he makes it because I don't want to see a President Kamala because that's atrocious. I'm hoping he runs. He will lose spectacularly. It'll make the Democrats look crazy, much like Biden is. And can you imagine the debates? Can you imagine, especially if it's against Trump, because of course they'll try to silence Trump and be lopsided, and Trump goes off the rails and antagonizes, and Biden mumbles and forgets what he's saying. It'd be the funniest election ever. I hope that happens in 2024. So I'm hoping that the midterms go heavily in populism's favor so that Trump probably runs again. And I'm hoping the Democrats get crippled, especially from the left, because then it makes Biden's I want to negotiate sort of thing look reasonably good. That's about all. Peace out.